I still haven't gotten exactly like a coherent definition of terrorism or why the IDF isn't terrorist. Israel didn't occupy them for a few months after a war or even a few years after a war. They occupied them for 60 years. The Palestinians today, the overwhelming majority of them, that's their entire life. The less violence that the Palestinians were under at Israeli hands, the harder it would be for Hamas to rally people.
Dave Smith just dismantled pro-Israel Zionist Coleman Hughes in a recent debate over all things Israel, Israel's influence in the U.S., Israel's policy in Gaza, the genocidal policy. And in this clip, he gets into why many Zionists fail to have the same moral standard when it comes to opposing evils and murders when it comes from the Israeli side. So let's get right into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I don't think this unilateral withdrawal strategy works. I think we have to have a peace deal and withdraw only in that context. Can you can sympathize with an Israeli voter with a family living who wants peace but says, I'm not going to sign on to peace unless it's going to be a real peace.
Yeah, I can sympathize with them. But again, it's the only one side who you ever make an attempt to like sympathize with.
No, I already gave you a whole answer about what I would think if I was a Palestinian.
Yeah, but it's
so
kind of nonsense.
Say,
it's like, yeah, but when you're
how is
sympathizing,
it nonsense?
Because when you're sympathizing with the Palestinians, you go, oh man, I think if I were a Palestinian, I would really feel like my government really should do a better job, or my government, that Hamas should really do a better job, instead of just going like,
no, I would be for a partition on either side. If I was, I have little kids. If someone had the value of life over my little kids, the way that all of you guys who support what Israel has been doing to Gaza for the last 2 years. Dave, I told you what I would say from a Palestinian perspective, and you are totally mischaracterizing what I said. What I said is that I would want Israel to end the war now. And then I would also want there to be some kind of massive effort to get rid of Hamas, because I would understand that my family would not have long-term peace until our regime was done with the forever war against Israel. That's what I said. Now, if you want to say that's disingenuous, a disingenuous version of a Palestinian, I don't think that's crazy.
Okay, I just got to say, I'm listening to like everything you say. I feel like you're cutting me off every time I talk. So
I only did that because you mischaracterized what I said.
Okay. No, I mean, I feel like every time. So anyway, but okay. I have little kids. If the little kids are being killed the way little kids in Gaza are being killed right now, and that was just like accepted, well, that's just what we have to do, I think I would probably join up with the most radical group I could find and try to kill as many Israelis as I could. Also, if I was in Israel and one of those terrorists came over and killed one of my little kids, I think I would probably be supporting like the destruction of the whole entire place. Yes, I can put myself in the situation of either one and totally sympathize. And by the way, I mean, this is just also borne out by opinion polls and stuff like that.
Yeah, Dave is exactly right here. I think he's doing a much better job of actually applying the same moral standards to both sides, whereas in Coleman Hughes, he did, in a different part of this interview, talk about, hey, let's steelman the Palestinian position, put ourselves in Palestinian shoes, and his example was something like, oh, hey, if I was in Palestinian shoes, I would blame my government. And, you know, obviously he blames the Palestinians and he blames Hamas, despite the fact that Hamas doesn't even have power over the West Bank, by the way. But at the same point, Dave is willing to put himself in both parties' shoes and, you know, denounce both sides for evil atrocities. But it seems like when many of the Zionists argue this fact, it's almost never against the Israeli government itself. So, especially when it's been massively disproportionate. It hasn't just been 1 or 2 times or 3 times or 10 times more people that the Israelis have killed since October 7th. It's about been 100 times more people that they've killed since October 7th. But we always have to, when putting ourselves in the other shoes, still blame Hamas and Palestinians in general, when it's clear that Israel is committing the brunt of the atrocities. The U.S. is bankrolling Israel, and that's something Dave is rightly pointing out here.
Of course, we only talked about it from the Israeli side when we were saying that after the second Intifada, public support for a two-state solution really tanked. But also, you can go look at how when the peace process fell apart, support for terrorists rose amongst the Palestinians. Like when the peace process was on the table, Hamas had much less support, and when it fell apart, they got more support. The point is that there is this, there was a plan with this movement of Zionism to create a Jewish state in historic Palestine. It has always involved an enormous amount of force in order for the thing to be created. There has been, Israel and the Palestinians essentially have been at war since 1947.
Yeah, this is true. And if you look back at what Theodore Herzl and David Ben-Gurion wrote about this, they made no bones about the fact that this effort, this project, would cause the mass displacement of people and the mass murder of people. They were open about that in some of their only writings. David Ben-Gurion has one that's only in Hebrew, and again, this doesn't get much traction in mainstream media, but that's true, and it has been an on and off again war, if you want to say it's a genocide now, since 1947. The globalist effort to partition and redistribute land and property that was that of the Palestinians to Jews because of a UN mandate. You know, the UN, the globalist organization that many conservatives rightly condemn as robbing the US of its sovereignty. Yeah, that's what they cite when they back, you know, their ideas and conception for the legitimacy of a Israeli state.
I mean, there's flare-ups and there's times that are worse. Right now, it's the worst it's ever been. But that also really says something at the end of this project. We are Americans sitting halfway around the world. And I think that obviously our role here should be to say, like, hey, let's try to de-escalate this thing. I can sympathize with people on both sides of this struggle. Obviously, horrific crimes have been committed by Arabs and by Israelis. The Palestinians have gotten the brunt of it. Far more of them have been killed.
Yeah, 100 times more, by the way. Under kind of medium estimates, it's about 100 times more. That's a point I've never seen Coleman deal with. Despite having overwhelming sympathies for Israel under the supposed standard of, you know, murders and terrorism, but it seems like the IDF is the more powerful and influential terrorist organization in the Middle East right now, backed by the U.S.
And they have been the losers in this conflict, obviously. But the fact is that my country, I'm forced to prop this whole thing up. And I just think this is like appalling. I mean, like, look, there's just, with all of these problems, look, you can, if you want to go back through history and you want to always, like, give the benefit of the doubt to Israel and always focus on what all the Arabs have done that's wrong, you can do that. In conflicts like this, you can also do the opposite, which I see lots of people do. I actually think I'm much more of a moderate on this topic than most people see me as, but whatever. I'm not like the equal opposite version of that, which I see a lot of people are, refer to Hamas as freedom fighters and everything is it. There's been atrocities committed by both sides here. There's been bad decisions made by both sides.
Yeah, and that's where I am at too. I obviously sympathize with the Palestinians more than my criminal government, but at the same time, no matter who you are, this shouldn't be controversial to say. If you kill innocents that, aren't military combatants, you are evil. And that goes for the Palestinians and that goes for Israel. And if you have a problem with saying that, you're too bent into one of two tribal directions that can't see humanity for what it is. It's, a universal gift that we all have individual rights bestowed upon us by our Creator. And if you only see that kind of view from one of these two sides, you're too bought into this narrative that is, a political and propaganda narrative that diminishes the value of human life.
But the idea, dude, like, okay, even if you want to blame the 67 war on Egypt and Jordan, like, okay, there's a reasonable argument to be made for that. Even if you want to say, oh, they wanted to not occupy them for this long, dude, you just get to a certain point. The thing, even when you're talking about how the Egyptians and the Palestinians, talking about the three no's, this was within like 20 years of the creation of the state of Israel. It was a new thing. When it's a new thing, people still want to undo the last thing. And you see it like even in the same way that like Republicans don't talk about repealing Obamacare anymore. It's just too old now, man. It's part of the system. That's not even a talking point anymore. It's a huge talking point in 2012, but it's just not anymore, okay? The thing is, Israel didn't occupy them for a few months after a war or even a few years after a war. They occupied them for 60 years. The Palestinians today, I don't know the exact numbers, the overwhelming majority of them, that's their entire life. Because their entire life has been living under foreign military occupation or under siege, complete domination from a foreign country.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the people that say, oh no, they withdrew in 2005. Did they really? Did they really withdraw so they don't subjugate the Palestinians in Gaza now? They don't have a blockade. They don't treat them miserably, diminish their rights, not acknowledge their due process, not allow restitution and the right to return, not allow them to even vote in their elections despite touting themselves as the only democracy in the Middle East. And you're under our subjugation, but you elected, a proxy government that we didn't like. This is just so absurd. These people have been beleaguered for so long. And how long does it have to continue? There's no reason that this has to go on and has to have moral support. This can't have moral support. This is crazy. Dave's exactly right. Also, the 67 war, that was a war that Menachem Begin, one of Israel's prime ministers, he was a literal terrorist at one point, by the way, he said that was a war of choice, that Israel played a role in it being started too, although the mainstream narrative is always that Israel or Jordan and Egypt just ganged up against a country that wasn't doing anything wrong and just minding its own business. Well, no, it was established about 18 years earlier under a robbery project.
And that is just unacceptable. That is a status quo that just cannot be justified, much like the destruction of Gaza over the last 2 years. And likewise, as an American, I am outraged that we're forced to finance the thing and prop it up.
So, do you believe that Israel should withdraw from the West Bank unilaterally because you can't occupy other people for 60-odd years? So tell me what about the following sketch you find, and what you would do in the following situation. Israel unilaterally, they listen to Dave Smith. They say, we got to get out of the West Bank. We got to do Olmert's convergence plan. Regardless, it's just been too long. Screw the trade-offs. Would you allow them to have border security with Jordan or no?
I'm sorry. So it would allow the West Bank to have border security
with Jordan? Would you allow Israel to have some control over the West Bank border with Jordan or no?
Well, the West Bank, I'm sorry, maybe I'm not following the question here. So if they were to give the Palestinians a state, but
correct.
Then Israel would control the Jordanian border, but this would be the border between the West Bank and Jordan?
Correct.
You're talking about?
Yeah.
I guess not.
Yeah, and to be clear, this was part of the Camp David Accords where, the propaganda from Zionists was like, oh, Israel offered the Palestinians 97% of what they wanted. Well, no, Israel would have controlled the Jordanian border, not allowed the right of return, taken, much more land than the Palestinians would have wanted to give up. Lots of poison pills involved in that. So I'm with Dave. I would oppose that too. Israeli control over Palestinian airspace, that was part of that farcical deal that they said, oh, it was such a great deal, just to maintain this kind of propaganda that, oh, hey, they actually tried to give them a state. They didn't. It was loaded with poison pills.
I don't know.
Okay. So they withdraw from the West Bank. They don't control the border with Jordan. As happened in Gaza, it's a fairly high probability that there would be some kind of civil war between Hamas, which is more popular in the West Bank than the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian Authority. So there would be some kind of power struggle between Abbas and Fatah and Hamas on the other end. Now, it's possible that Fatah just wins, and that would be a really good outcome, I think, for the Palestinians and the region. But they didn't win in Gaza, and they don't have great state capacity, great security control regardless. So with no help from the IDF, the betting man would predict that Hamas takes over, if not the whole West Bank, then some Lebanon situation where they control territory within the West Bank. Now, we know what Hamas wants to do. They've said they will do October 7th again and again and again, even knowing the ridiculous cost that's been imposed on Gaza in this war. And we know that it's very easy to smuggle
weapons across the border with Jordan. There's been tons of problems with weapons smuggling in Jordan in the past. There's no reason Iran would not be able to help them. So what you have now is a situation where Hamas controls some territory in the West Bank. And this is not like, I don't think the scenario I'm sketching is the paranoid ramblings of someone in the Israeli security state. I think it's pretty much a center of the fairway prediction. It could go better, it could go worse. But now you have Hamas controlling strategic territory, high ground in the West Bank, much closer to Tel Aviv, maybe 45 miles from Tel Aviv, with missiles perhaps that could easily reach that. Eventually they're going to attack because this is who they are. What happens then? Is this an outcome? I mean, it will lead to another war, and I don't know how bloody that war will be. I know it certainly won't be good for the Palestinians. And so, do you feel any burden to defend? What would you say when that day came? Would you say, actually, I was wrong about unilateral withdrawal from the West Bank?
Okay, this is built on mountains and mountains and layers of hypotheticals about what could happen if the Israelis give the Palestinians a state, rather than dealing with the reality that we're dealing with now, and that's a mass murder machine from Israel. So to Coleman's, point here, in this hypothetical situation, it doesn't matter what I would say. My policy is America first. My policy is don't support entangling alliances overseas. And by the way, I have that opinion whether it comes to Israel or Ukraine or Taiwan or any other country. That is my position. And if that causes hardships for people in the region, I'm sorry. I don't want to be the U.S. policeman siding with one of those two factions in this hypothetical civil war he's talking about that could be disastrous for Israelis, could be disastrous for Palestinians, could be disastrous for them both. That's not what Americans should prioritize or our country should prioritize. Just taking security standpoints in other parts of the world is not part of the American mantra that Thomas Jefferson sold in his first inaugural address. And that's the one I agree with. It's peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. And Coleman won't deal with the reality right now, which is a mass murder machine that maybe it behooves us to do something different after, about 100,000 Palestinians are killed. But instead he builds these mountains of hypotheticals. Well, it could be bad in this case. Well, it's bad now given the status quo policy. But let's see how Dave answers this.
Or would you say, no, I was still right about it for the following reasons?
I mean, if things were different, we'd be having a different conversation. And if Israel did take the boot off the neck of the Palestinians and they started attacking Israel, well, then that sure would be a different conversation. But again, with the unfalsifiable counterfactuals, or here's another scenario. It was like Egypt. And they just didn't fight wars anymore. I think there's a lot of reason, as I was saying before, getting into with the opinion polls where you see when the peace negotiations fall apart, support for Hamas goes up. You see this constantly. You see after October 7th, there was a rally around the flag effect in Israel. You saw this after 9/11 when George W. Bush had record high approval ratings. General McChrystal, not exactly a libertarian dove like myself, he was the one who coined the term insurgent math about Afghanistan. And this was not an ideologue of any sort, just somebody who wanted to win the war. And he was just saying, right, 10 minus 2 equals 20. You got a list of insurgents that we're supposed to take out, but every time we strike them, a bunch of innocent people get killed. And then the list gets longer and longer and longer because people want to join up with the cause.
Yeah, this is exactly right. And this is something that was pointed out by McChrystal in this article in 2010. He was the commander in Afghanistan, pointing to the situation that U.S. troops were dealing with there. He says right here that the problem with U.S. involvement in these theaters of war, and I'll extend it here to make it easier to see, is insurgent math. For every innocent people you kill, you create 10 new enemies. And this is the theory that drives terrorism throughout the world. This is what drove Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, too. He could constantly point to things that the U.S. did in the Middle East that were murderous, like the militarization of the Arabian Peninsula, using that as a staging ground for the invasion of Iraq in the first case, it was for the starvation regime that had formed around Iraq and starving innocents throughout, the 90s there. It was the U.S. relationship with Israel and U.S. funding for Israel and Israel's murder spree and what they call mowing the lawn in Gaza. And that means that every so often you just have to kill a bunch of Palestinians. So, yeah, that is what drives these people.
And so essentially, I don't think it's the likely bet that things would be much, much worse. I think that what creates a lot of this, the terrorism is and again, like I said, I still haven't gotten exactly like a coherent definition of terrorism or why the IDF isn't terrorist or what, you know what I mean? But violence is used by human beings because it's effective. And I think that the less violence that the Palestinians were under at Israeli hands, the harder it would be for Hamas to rally people.
100% agree. This is such a good point because that is the propaganda. All these atrocities that Israel commits, this was designed in Hamas's case to provoke this sort of, reaction to draw public opinion away from Israel internationally, which has happened, and even in the U.S., perhaps, which is happening. It hasn't happened. Unfortunately, my criminal government is in lockstep with Netanyahu and the Likudnik coalition that he's assembled to carry out these atrocities in Gaza. But this is the propaganda war. Hamas would not be able to recruit to enact vengeance for their dead beloved, for their, sisters and wives, etc., if they weren't under this constant murder spree from the IDF. So I'm with Dave on that entirely. You wouldn't have the propaganda regime that you could to support this organization in general. And by the way, if you didn't have Netanyahu's money, about $1.8 billion over many years funded through Qatar, as an intermediary, Hamas would not be that strong either. But I guess we never blame Netanyahu for that if you're a Zionist.
The harder it would be to get people to go commit these acts. So again, look, like I give you the example of Egypt, which is a country that I don't think you would say doesn't have a radical Islam problem. You know what I mean? Like Hamas was born out of like a Muslim Brotherhood offshoot, essentially. Egypt is there. They were the biggest enemy of Israel, not an Arab enemy, the Arab enemy of Israel. Fought 4 wars with them in 20-something years. They've had peace ever since they gave up the land.
Yeah, I mean, that is the case. That's another hypothetical you could build to say what could happen. What are the possibilities if the Palestinians were given a state? But Dave's point isn't to say like, oh, hey, consider this. It's to say, we can build all sorts of hypotheticals we want. Both situations have kind of unfolded throughout history where, hey, you give a beleaguered people what they want, it turns on you for some reason, or it ends up with 0 wars like Egypt. Now, the U.S. did pay off Egypt and Jordan as a result of the 1979 Camp David Accords, where, hey, we just give them, Egypt something like $1.2 billion now just not to go to war with Israel. That's effectively aid to Israel in addition to all the other billions of dollars in aid that the U.S. gives them. But that has been a situation that's unfolded. Now, I'm not for any foreign policy to any countries unless it's part of a treaty that's actually beneficial in some ways to the U.S. and U.S. security. But even then, that's not what we have. We have subsidizing the security of foreign nations. It's not security, it's subsidizing the genocide of Israel right now. So yeah, Coleman isn't living in the reality to construct all of these hypotheticals. And if you create these hypotheticals, one could easily say, hey, the hypothetical could be like Egypt. And he's not dealing with that. Dave, on the other hand, is putting himself in the shoes of both groups, holding the same moral standard against murder in both cases, and believing that as in America, we should pay interest to American policies and American interests, not those of Israel or the Gazans in Palestine. And the U.S. should get out of this entangling alliance. And look, I wanted to point out 2 things that I thought were interesting as overall takeaways from this interview that you saw Coleman Hughes make. He is a Zionist, but at one point in this interview, I was a little bit surprised to say this, that he favors an immediate end to this war. And it's not a war, that's how the Zionists put it, but it's a genocide. So he favors that, but, you know, this big crackdown against Hamas, whatever that means, you know, the crackdown in Gaza with IDF presence there doesn't seem to be going glowingly in some regards if they can continually say that Hamas is an existential threat. But that notwithstanding, you can see the territory that Zionists have already given up here, where their starting point is that they should withdraw. That was not the case 24 months ago after October 7th, where the pro-Israel fervor was at its highest. They would not have conceded that ground, and that shows a shifting of the sands in regard to this argument. Also, at a different point in this argument, he says, I'm not going to defend Netanyahu. I don't think that that's right to do that. Again, this shows a major change since October 7th and 24 months ago, where even though Netanyahu had just about to go down over fraud and corruption charges, you know, the Zionists backed him in lockstep over whatever he wanted to do to the Palestinians after October 7th. This was their 9/11. The Zionists were selling it that way. Anything he wants to do with U.S. funding there, he can do. But they're backing off that too. That is showing where this argument is going. It's becoming indefensible to defend Netanyahu and to defend this continual military occupation, this ethnic cleansing campaign, this genocide in Gaza. They will call it none of those things, but the implicit in some of this argumentation is where this is moving, because it's just indefensible now. And I think that's something that this debate brought out. Points for Dave Smith here. I think he handled these questions and these lines of questions, much of which were hypothetical, extremely well. But I do want to hear from what you guys have to say. Let me know down below. Did Dave Smith dismantle Coleman Hughes here? Was his argument better? What are the benefits of talking about these hypotheticals when it could go either way, when we're dealing with reality now that's particularly murderous and makes the U.S. complicit? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Dave Smith. Awesome argumentation from him here. I think he did a great job. And if you like this video and my commentary, please click the join button below. You could become a channel member, and that gets you the benefit of having advanced viewing of all of my videos before they go live to the general public. You'll be able to see all the members only videos in advance. Until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.